everybody and welcome to another video. So in today's video we'll go over the BLTouch installation for the CR10 V3 and whether or not this is worth getting. Before we begin, I'd like to make it clear that this review was in no way sponsored and that I purchased the BLT with my own money at the same time as the CR10 V3. And this represents my own opinions as to what I've experienced. In order to do this upgrade, you're going to need to know a couple of things. Now in most cases, when you first order your machine, it came with a USB stick which had everything you needed to get started, including the firmware upgrade that you'll need. If you don't have this, however, that's fine since it's readily available through the main website of Creality.com. The firmware comes pre-compiled, which is nice. However, the zip file has some extra characters which prevent the operating system from recognizing the files. So the first thing you'll want to do is remove the extra characters after the .zip. At this point, you can then extract the files within the folder where you'll be treated to the instructional PDF as well as the firmware. Before flashing the firmware, you'll need to connect your computer to the 3D printer, and the required cable doesn't come with the machine, so you need to obtain that prior to installation. Furthermore, you want to make sure that your chosen slicer software is closed as well as any other flashing software such as Xloader, Arduino, or Pronterface. In order to do this upgrade, you will need to use the included Creality slicer since simply inserting an SD card with the firmware will not work, or using Cura and Xloader. This software is also available through the main website. While you might be able to use a custom bootloader, that wasn't something that was tested at the time since the upgrade worked with the included software. Once you have the Creality slicer open, you'll need to make the following changes. Go to File, Preferences, change printer window type to Pronterface, then select OK. Then go to File, Machine Settings, and change the serial port to COM3. Then the baud rate to 115200, at which point you can select OK. Then go to Machine, Install Custom Firmware, and navigate to the BLTouch firmware that you intend to install. In my case, I renamed the file. However, yours will most likely be called CR10 V2 TF 1.1.6.0 BLTouch V3.1. Give the machine a little time to finish the upload, at which point you'll be ready to do the rest of the installation process. To begin, we no longer require the Z-axis end stop, so for this reason we're going to remove this so that it doesn't interfere. The next stage is to install the BLTouch itself. You want to put the first two screws going up from the bottom of the sensor on the side which you see the 3 holes. Only 2 holes will have screws for them. Make sure to add the connector cable to the BLTouch since it will be difficult to access this once it's installed fully. After, you can then install the remainder 2 screws to the appropriate location of the nozzle housing. Remove the XC transfer interface housing so that you have access to the female header and attach the connector to it. You can then attach the housing to complete the assembly. The next stage is to set up the BLTouch leveling, and first we will do a basic bed leveling to determine the low and high points of the machine. To do this, go to Prepare, Bed Leveling, and allow the machine to complete the probing. We now need to set up the Z offset, which is currently set higher to ensure the bed isn't damaged. Go to Prepare, Move Axis, Move Z, move 10 mm, where you'll set this to 0. Then go to 1 mm and lower this the first couple of increments, but not too far, otherwise you'll hit the bed. You'll then want to move it 0.1 mm at a time to get it to the appropriate height. Make sure to write down this value since you'll need this later. You can use a piece of paper to help ensure that you have the proper distance, if that's what you're currently used to using. Go back to the menu hierarchy and go to Control, Initialize EEPROM, where once you enter this menu, you'll get a warning beep. Go to Motion, Z Offset, and set the number that you wrote down here. Go back one menu and choose Store Settings, at which point your machine will beep another warning. Navigate out the main menu where you can then start your first test print. I'm using a model that was created by Binom on Thingiverse. Since they created different files for different nozzle widths and I had changed mine to 0.8. I will be including the link in the description below if you would like to use it yourself. Make sure to keep the wire slack, otherwise the connector will get removed while printing. With all these steps completed, it was now time to test print, and these were the results. For any of you who have been doing 3D printing for a while, you'll have an appreciation as to how long it can take to clean up a model such as this. In this case, it took well over an hour just to remove the supports, and ended up getting large chunks half across my room. So yeah, I'd highly recommend you use some high protection depending on the filament you're using, and unless you have some very callous hands, you may also want to use gloves. Overall, however, the final model turned out pretty good, considering it was printed with a 0.8 nozzle and a 0.5 layer height. So was this mod worth the effort? In my case, I would say that it was, since I rarely swap out my nozzle. However, if you swap out your nozzle more often, then this may not be faster than simply hand leveling the bed, although it is more accurate. So like most cases, it will depend on your use case, but I would suggest adding this if you have an opportunity, since it is quite useful. If you liked this video, please feel free to subscribe, and should you wish to support more content like this, you can do so by visiting my online shop, which is in the description below. For those of you who may not know, I do live streams twice a week on Twitch, so make sure to keep an eye out for those if you're interested. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you guys soon. Thank you and take care.